Hi, my name's Kip, and thanks for watching this video by Great Nutshell Productions. You can find more interesting videos at www.greatnutshells.com for download or order the full quality DVD series. Now today we're going to set up a Les Paul studio, and the Les Paul has a rich history, is a very interesting guitar using typically double humbuckers or two humbuckers and a tunematic bridge and so forth. So we're going to begin to do the setup, and before we can do a setup we need to get our tools together.
To do this on any guitar or bass, we're going to need some tools, and the tools which are called to do are as follows. You should have an electrical tool, a sample, an increase to put the press down. You should have a set of screwdrivers, both Phillips and standard, a couple of different kinds of Phillips for the different types of screws, and you should have some sort of nut driver that will fit the electrical input to the input blocks of your instrument. You should also have a set of automatic fluid gauges. And it doesn't hurt to have an automated mirror, a mechanic mirror. You should have full wire to turn those fluids if you want to, or that's no hurt. You need a push-out, a 6-inch mechanic fluid. And usually the guys that use the glass, you get this in steel on the back side here, got all the conversions from AC to 90. And on the flip side here, it's got the 2-inch rule on one side, it's got like a deck tube, it's got all kinds of useful little measurements in it for something to fit there. So that's really easy to have. If you have some tall files, the main one that you use to keep fretboards and bigger than a computer probe. And you can have some of this electro sound, which is a trigger that you spray onto your electronics when you start to get a little explosion and it turns up the sound. This switches that around that software that can do it without having to replace the potential around it. Not to mention, you need a good power sensor.
Now that we've got our tools together, let's talk about strings. Guitar string choices for the electric guitar, or guitars that use magnetic pickups, are a great number in terms of their brands, gauges, and alloys or compound types. And here's just a very small selection of the types of strings that are available. Essentially, you're looking at nickel wound or nickel plated strings, which are the between string. That is a string that is a steel core with the wound, which is also steel but has a nickel plating, and that'll give you a medium output, a medium tone, as opposed to the pure nickel, which means that the wound portion of the string is pure nickel, which will give you a warmer tone but less output. It induces a voltage lighter or a less of a voltage on a magnetic pickup than the nickel plated. And then we have stainless steel. Stainless steel is gives a brighter, a little more bite, and a greater output because it induces a voltage better. And those are the three compound choices. But then you have to add to that the different gauges, the different brands, and different types. For example, clear tones or elixir strings, which use a different treatment. Elixirs use a polyweb, where the clear tones use what they call enhanced molecular protection. And these strings tend to last quite a bit longer. They help to, because of the process that they use, it helps to keep the oils and acids from our skin from affecting the strings and causing them to go bad much quicker. Now, for jazz guitar, it is common to use either a half round or a flat round, or in this case, this is called a ribbon round. But just remember, for any electric guitar with magnetic pickups, you have the 3 compound choices. Now remember, when you go up a gauge to a heavier string, you get more volume because there's more mass to the string, but you also get less playability because it's harder to bend the string. As you go down, you get less tone, less volume, but you get more playability. So if you're playing a lot of blues and things where you need to bend the string, you're going to want to go down to a 9. Whereas if you're going to a heavier string, you might want to go up to a 13. There's a couple of reasons that we do an inspection before we begin our setup and to take measurements. Firstly, we are looking for damage to our instrument. It's very common, for example, on a Les Paul to have for the neck to break right here, the headstock from the neck itself. So we're looking for things of that nature, things that may be getting ready to happen. Cracks in the finish, cracks at a glue joint, loose parts, and so forth. The other reason that we like to do a thorough inspection is to identify the reason that we're doing a setup to start with. And the setup, if we're having string buzz, we want to identify where that buzz is coming from. Forward on the neck, backward on the neck, in the center of the neck, and so forth. Which specific string, all the strings. If it's uncomfortable to play, we're wanting to identify why that is, because that helps us understand the reason for our setup and the portions of the setup that we need to look at more specifically, and also to determine whether or not we need a setup. If you're not having issues, you might still need a setup and just not know it. So we're going to start, and I usually just start down at the one end and work my way to the other. It's very common to get string buzz, and it's common to get rattling, and it's important to be able to identify the two from each other. And rattling is typically caused by loose parts. Buzzing is typically caused by the strings. So I like to check, for example, down here on the input jack, this plate can sometimes get loose, this nut can sometimes get loose. And so we want to make sure that these are tight. Now, it's very common for the input jack nut to get loose, and then we have to deal with that. And sometimes it's really hard to get it to stay put. You'll tighten it, and then it will loosen again, tighten it, and it'll loosen again. So it's not a big deal if you need to take a little fingernail polish and just put on the edge of the thread when you tighten it down. That'll help to keep it from backing off, but it's not a permanent. So when you do go to turn it, the fingernail polish busts loose and turns to powder typically. Also, check your potentiometer knobs and see that those aren't making any sound. If you need to, you can pull the knobs off. Some of them have a set screw in the side you'll have to do, and take a closer look at the they'll have a little nut like this with the post coming out of it. You can take a closer look at that. Here's the tail piece on the Les Paul. Make sure that doesn't wiggle. This should not be rattling. Now on the pickups themselves, these are humbuckers, and Les Pauls have humbuckers. Usually 2, sometimes 3. These are set on springs. There's a screw here on both ends, and that's what you use to raise and lower your pickups, and they're setting on a spring. And so these should wiggle. So don't make yourself think that there's something wrong if these move. This is okay. If it's excessive, where you might get some vibration from playing, then you might want to take this off and take a look at it, but that's not very common to run into. Also, you'll want to check and make sure that the pick guard, now see, this pick guard is quite loose, and so we're going to need to deal with that. I've got a screwdriver right here. Let's see if we can do that without... And there we go. That one's tight enough now. And might as well just check this end here while we're at it to make sure that was loose, and it may loosen up again. So we'll probably take a closer look at that before we give this back to our customer. Your selection switch, make sure that is tight and doesn't wiggle excessively. And then also your strap buttons, don't forget. Those sometimes get loose and can become a problem. And those are screwed into wood. And so sometimes the screw that goes into the wood gets walled out the hole and it doesn't stay put very well and it's loose. So there's two issues there. One is that it's just not very secure, and so it may pull out. And secondly, if it pulls out, then you're likely to drop your instrument and break it. So you want to make sure that those are tight. If you have a problem with that, it's a real simple repair. Take the screw out, take some wood glue, take a toothpick, shove it in the hole, break the toothpick off at the right length, screw the screw back in. That'll shim it, and then when the screw drives, that'll tighten it, and that makes a really, really strong repair. We're going to want to take a real good close look around here. This is where the neck comes into and is glued to the body. Now, some models, more inexpensive ones, have a bolt-on neck. This one here is a set neck. So there's nothing we can do here. With a bolt-on neck, you'll want to check the screws with the plate and so forth. This particular one is a set neck, and there's a difference between a finish crack and a crack that goes into the wood. So if you have a little bit of a crack here, that's not good, but it could be due to a little flexing in that the polyurethane finish or the lacquer finish has cracked. But it hasn't gone into the wood. And the simple way to check that, if you have one, and this instrument looks very good, so there's no issue there. But if you have any places you're not sure if it's a crack, a separation going on, take a thin piece of paper and just see how far you can slide that into the crack. And that works really well. Going further up, we talked about the neck. Here, this is where it's common for them to break. So it's very good idea that you always use a guitar stand to store your instrument out if you're going to store it out of the case. And when it's in the case, that's fine, other than like a gig bag. You still don't want to lean a gig bag up and have the wall pressing against the top of the headstock here. That's putting extra pressure here. So and then if you travel, always make sure you detune the instrument so that there's not additional pressure or leverage being pulled on that headstock, which causes more of this breakage to happen. You're going to want to take a good close look also at your frets, especially the places that you play most commonly, because frets are made out of nickel and they're very soft compared to steel, and you can get some wear there. That is a typical place where buzzing, string buzzing, will begin to happen if we have uneven frets. And frets become uneven, one, because they were made at a moderate price in a foreign country. Nothing against a foreign country, it's just the way it is. Some of the imports are not as careful as the ones that are made here in the States. So, you pay more money, you get more care, right? So you want to take a close look at that. And one way that you can check to see if you have any fret problems like that is you can take something with a straight edge that's 4 to 6 inches long, and you can move it very gently up here and pay attention, because if you hit a fret with this end, then the fret's high. But also, as you look at it, look under the card and see if light ever shows through. Also, if it begins to rock, you have a high one. But if you have light coming through, then you'll know you have a low fret, and you can check that up and down the neck. If you have a problem like that, then it's a good idea to take it to your local luthier and have them deal with it, either by giving it a fret job if it's a lot of it, or working on the offending fret. Also, I like to look at my fretboard, make sure there's no cracking going on. When you change your strings, it's a good idea to put some lemon oil on the fretboard. Any non-treated, non-painted surfaces of wood, it's a good idea to oil them occasionally on the fretboard in an acoustic guitar or an archtop guitar on the rosewood bridge piece as well. Then we come up to the nut, and the nut is something that we want to pay extra close attention to as well. We want to make sure, one, the finish of the nut. If it's a new instrument, a lot of times they won't bring the nut ends right up flush with the finish because of haste. especially on lower end instruments. And so it's nice to file that down smooth. If you do that, be very, very careful and tape off all the sections around where you're going to file that you don't want to actually accidentally mar, because you can do that fairly easily. Run your finger across the top of the nut. The strings, the wound strings most specifically, need to have about a third of the string exposed above the nut. Otherwise, it tends to pinch the string and affect the tone a little bit. So that's something that can be done. If you find one that is not exposed enough, when you change your strings, take a file and very gently file down and fit that in there so that you get a little bit of nut or string exposed above the nut, not set down in the nut. But you want to look for some separation. Any place where the glue is coming apart, any cracks in the nut, that's common on an older instrument to get the nut to begin to crack. Sometimes the edge will chip off here, causing the small or the high E string not to stay put where it belongs. And so we're going to take a look at that. And then finally, you're going to want to take and look at the tuning machines, top and bottom. See if there's anything that's loose and would vibrate, and this type of a tuning machine that they use, that you will get some play end to end, because it's just gear driven. These aren't die cast tuning machines on this particular model anyway, and these are very traditional for the Les Paul, and that usually won't cause a lot of vibration, buzzing or sounds, but you can get or rattling sounds rather. You can get, if the nut here on the top loosens at all, that this washer that's right underneath of that nut will start to vibrate. And sometimes I'll get confused, or not confused, but I will be fooled into thinking the vibration's coming from someplace else. For some reason, it tends to travel down the neck and make you think it's down at the bridge sometimes. So a lot of times I'll just take a little screwdriver carefully, because I don't want to mar the finish, and just shove it just a little bit and see if I get any play there, if everything feels fine. Once you've done that, we're ready to start actually taking some measurements that will help identify why we may or may not be having specific problems. Now that we've done our inspection, it's a good idea to go ahead and check the scale length and the rough intonation of your instrument. To do that, you're going to need a 24 or 25-inch ruler. We'll take the ruler and we'll bring that right up to the edge of the nut. Then we will find out what the measurement says at the 12th fret. So we measure to the center of the 12th fret. And to the center of the 12th fret, we are 12 inches and a quarter. So we double that, and that is 24 and a half inches. Then we move our ruler till the edge of the ruler here is right in the center of the 12th fret, and then we check at the saddle. And on the high E, from the center of the fret, should be close to 12 and a quarter, the measurement we took originally, and that is very close. Now, we would set that to 12 and a quarter using our screwdriver. In fact, it was just a little bit back, so let's just go ahead. For a rough intonation, we really don't have to be quite that precise, but let's go ahead and do that for you. Take the measurement again. And we are now at 12 and a quarter. So that's exactly correct. Now the rest of this is really pretty simple. So we'll set the next one, the B string. We will set, and sometimes you have to move the string out of your way so you can turn it. We will set that even with the E string saddle, and then we back it off the thickness of the gauge of the string we're using. So we went this way, and this, don't have to be that precise, you just kind of guesstimate. Then you do the same thing with the next string. make it even with the one we just backed off, and then back it off the thickness of the string of the gauge that we're using. Now on the D string, we want to remeasure that to 12 1/4 and set it in that position. And in this case, it's quite a bit off. So we would run that one forward. I'm going to have to loosen that string a little bit. There we go. Run that forward. Even with our first measurement to 12 1/4. And that's pretty close. Then follow the procedure for the thickness of the next string. Approximately, because there again, that's why we call it rough intonation. And this one, and there we go. Now there's another way to do this, and that is to use your electronic tuner and just check and see if when I play the open string and when I play an octave higher at the 12th fret, if that is close to an E and an octave higher E, then, and I do that all the way through, then we know that our rough intonation is good. Then we can work on the rest of the instrument, and then at the end we'll do our final intonation. Now it's time to check the relief in the neck. Now the neck relief is what we measure to measure how much dip there is around the 8th fret. There's a truss rod in the neck, and that truss rod is there to counter the tension that is put on the neck by this tension of the strings pulling on it. It's something that'll pull the neck back so that we don't have too much relief. And so we're trying to balance the tension pulled by the strings by the tension pulled back with the truss rod to achieve the proper amount of relief. Less relief we can get away with without string buzz, the better. And some luthiers actually try to achieve a perfectly flat neck. In order to do that, you have to be able to do fret work, and so it is perfectly acceptable and normal and common, and in most every manufacturer I know is part of their specifications to have just a little relief. Now if we get a negative relief, that is called back bow, and where the truss rod is too tight and it puts a hump around the 8th fret, so the neck goes this way instead of this way. Okay, and of course this is very extreme. So you can actually sight down the neck and you can see a degree of relief. And when you're doing the sight down the neck, you can also determine whether or not the neck is setting, has a twist in it, or from the nut to the body to the bridge, whether the entire neck, regardless of the relief, is sitting this way. This would be called a negative neck set, and that's a bad thing and is not easy to fix on your own with a guitar that has a set neck or a through neck. So what we need to check the relief of the neck is we're going to need our capo, we're going to need our feeler gauge, and we're going to need our index finger. We're going to place our capo just behind the 1st fret. And we're going to want to make sure that when we put it on there, we make sure it clamps straight down. We don't just stick it on there haphazardly. We want to be careful to make sure that the strings are not being pushed left or right any, because that will change some issues there. Then we will place our index finger just forward of the last fret. Then, taking the 1/1000th or 0.010 feeler gauge from your feeler gauge set, and remember, keep your index finger in place, pressing just forward to that last fret. At the 8th fret, we are going to slide that under the string on the low E, and we're going to do that on the high E, and it should fit perfectly. It should just barely touch the string without lifting it, and there shouldn't be any extra slack there. Now, this actually lifts the string a little bit, so we're going to have to add a little relief or loosen the truss rod, because as you tighten the truss rod, the neck becomes flatter or becomes even, we'll put a hump in the neck. As you loosen it, it allows the strings, again, to pull the neck and add some relief. So we need to loosen the truss rod just a little bit. To do that, we're going to have to remove this cap. On the Les Paul, at least every Les Paul I can bring to memory, but my memory's not that good anymore because I'm older, has the truss rod access at the headstock. Some instruments have them at the other end of the neck. We have to take this plate off, and here is the nut that we use to make these adjustments. Most of the time, we'll use an Allen wrench to make these adjustments, but the Les Paul has a special little tool, and it's just a little hex tool, kind of looks like a little pipe, and we place that on the nut. Now, you'll remember righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So if I go left, which we're going to do to increase some relief in the neck, it will loosen the truss rod, so the nut will be coming off of the rod. If we go right, it will tighten. If you need to tighten it, it's still a good idea to go left before you go right to make sure that the nut is free and movable. If the nut is all the way seated as far as it can go to the right, and you force it further, you can break the truss rod. So you never want to force it, and you don't want to give undue torque or tension to the nut, especially going right, because you don't know if you've run out of room to go right. And when you break a truss rod, you definitely have a problem. So we're just going to turn this about a quarter turn. A little goes a long ways, and we're pretty far off. In fact, the string, it's a little stuck there. There we go. The string on the high E side was almost bottomed out, touching the fret when we did that before. Once you've loosened the truss rod, it doesn't hurt to place your hand at this point of the neck, and at about the 17th fret, or where the neck comes in contact with the body, just give a little pressure. Not a lot. You don't want to break the neck, but it helps to allow that neck to move in the position that you were trying to get if it's just not settled in that far, because that can happen. Now, we're going to have to retune, and that's one thing about doing setups. You're going to tune a lot. Always retune. Always take your time. Be patient. So retune the instrument, and then we'll take those measurements again and see where we're at. Once again, now that we've tuned, place our capo just behind the first fret, place our finger just in front of the last fret, and with our feeler gauge, again, we will check, and it touches but doesn't lift it much, just a tiny little bit, but we can live with that, and that's perfect right there. So and the proof is in the pudding. Remember, the numbers we're using are general numbers. You can go up or down from there depending on your playing style and what your instrument can get away with. Every instrument's different, and some instruments can handle a little lower or less relief. Some will require more relief, but the proof is in the playing. So once you've done the setup, you're going to want to play your instrument and try and identify areas where you can massage that setup to fit your own playing style and needs. Now our relief is proper. The next thing that we need to do is check our action. Now it's time to measure the action. And now action on a guitar is really, to a large degree, personal preference. It has a lot to do with your playing style. If you play really hard, types of music that you play, you're not going to be able to get away with really, really low action. If you play jazz, if you're a very light player, lots of lead guitar and so forth, you can get away with a much lower action. So a low action, and we measure that at the 12th fret, but and some people will measure it actually at the 17th fret. We're going to measure it at the 12th. But low action at the 12th fret, to me, is going to be on the low E side, is going to be about 3 30-seconds, which would be 5/64ths, and maybe 2 30-seconds on the high E side, and that would be considered quite low. If you bring everything up a 64th or a 32nd from there, that would be considered fairly high action. And I like my instruments with a nice low action, so we're going to set this one up to have a lower action. Now typically, the higher strings are going to, you're going to want to have those a little bit lower, a 32nd, 64th to a 32nd lower than the low strings, than the E, the low E. Some players like them the same all the way across. So, and there again, that's all personal preference, but we're going to show you how to measure that and determine what kind of action you have, and then we'll make some adjustments. Now to measure the action at the 12th fret, and when we take measurements, we're always taking it from the top of the actual fret to the bottom of the string. A lot of times they say, well, place your finger at the 12th fret. Well, they really mean place your fret the 12th fret, which would be putting your finger between. And that's when we're learning to play, because we never put our finger on top of the fret. But when we measure, we do measure from the top of the fret to the bottom of the string. And so take your 6-inch mechanics ruler and look and see what you've got. And here we have 1, 2, 3, 5/64ths, which is 3 30-seconds. That it might be a little more than 3 30-seconds. And on the far side, we're set to 2. So actually, the action on this instrument is pretty good. We could bring this low E down just a little bit. And let's go ahead and do that. Now, this is the Tune-o-matic saddle here. And what's nice about it is it's got individual moving saddles here, so we can do a good job intonating. But then on the outsides, we don't have individual string height adjustment. We only have the 2 outsides, and we screw them in or out to accomplish what we're after. Now, sometimes you can screw these without changing the tension, and sometimes you can't, but you just move these little wheels. Usually down you can get away with it. Going up is much more difficult, so you have to loosen the string a little bit. We're going to turn that just a few turns. There we go. And we'll take and measure again. And there again, taking our 6-inch mechanics ruler, we are now at, that should be about 3 30-seconds or 5/64ths, maybe a hair lower than that, which is okay, because we have to play it to know if we need to make any further adjustments. And that is good. So we're good right there. Now the next thing that we want to do, now that we've checked the action, the overall action, is to put our capo between the 2nd and 3rd frets and check and make sure that we have some space between the 1st fret and the bottom of the string all the way through. And in this case, we're good until we get to this high E, and it is actually touching the fret. So with an open string, an open position, this is likely or going to have a much greater chance of buzzing. So you can check when you're playing it and see if you notice any buzzing. If you do, then we're going to have to deal with this nut. Now that we've set our action, it's time to do the final intonation. And to do that, you'll need your electronic tuner. So get your electronic tuner, plug it in, and we'll begin that process. Now doing the final intonation is really quite simple. All you really need is your screwdriver that will fit the saddles adjustments and your electronic tuner, which we have plugged in. Make sure that your instrument is in tune so that when I play an E, that it is actually an E, not flat or sharp, an E. Then taking your finger and pressing no harder than you would normally play between the 11th and 12th frets. Check and see if that matches. That's an E, and that's a little bit sharp of an E. So if it's sharp, you move the saddle backwards or towards the bridge. If it's flat, you make the string shorter by moving the saddle forward. So we're going to move the saddle back. One turn. Retune, because that will cause the string to go flat in the open position. And that's good. Then we move to the next string. And that's good. Follow that procedure all the way through, making sure that you retune. Then do it again. Retune each string as you do it. Then you'll do it again one last time, because now the instrument is settled a little bit. And when you retune the E string, make sure you check the tuning on all the strings if you make an adjustment on any string, because the adjustment and the tuning and the tension will alter your instrument ever so slightly. So you can be as particular as you want. You can work very, very slowly and tune many, many times, tune everything. Every time you make an adjustment on one string, tune everything. I usually go through quickly, do the first once over, tuning one individual string, and then I'm much, much closer when I go to do the last one. But I'm always very particular about tuning each string, even if I make an adjustment on just one string. Check the tuning on all the strings your last time through. Then your instrument will be in proper intonation.